Are we in focus? Konnichiwa, everyone. It's the rocker, the headbanger, and the oddball back, and participating in yet another one of these tag thread type thingies. And I do enjoy these, and I'm racking my 3 brain cells together to think up one of my own. Until then, though, I'm hopping on a thread I saw on Peter's Music as a Journey channel recently, started by Brian at Tokyo Record Style. Now, considering my mastering of the Japanese language, you might be surprised to know I've never actually been there. I know, hard to believe. But it has long been a bucket list country to visit, but sadly, given my parlous state of health, I don't think I'll ever be able to tick that off my list now, and participating in this thread may be as close as I ever get. Anyway, Brian has asked us to show 20 albums or pieces of music matching his Japan-themed criteria for this thread. And as it's quite a task and may take some time, I'll just be getting straight into the albums. If you want to see the inspiration behind the thread, then please check Brian's channel out. So, without any further ado, let's get on with it. I haven't got the albums with me, but what I have done is taken pictures of them. Otherwise, I've been carting 20 albums around the house, and I don't want to do that. So I got pictures of them. I've got notes on my screen as to what I'm going to talk about. So I may be looking back and forth, but there we go. It is very much what it is. Now, first up is an album with an Obi strip. Now, I've got a couple of Japanese import things, mostly Queen stuff. I bought back in the late 70s, early 80s, it must have been. I bought a copy of A Day at the Races, which was a Japanese import. I'm not sure if that came with an Obi strip or not. I can't remember. Back then, I probably wouldn't have kept it. But there is like a Japanese language insert in the album. And then I got a number of Queen Japanese import singles, which have like a nice sort of slip inner with a picture on and some wording in Japanese. But I'm going to pick a non-Japanese album for this one, and it's Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, a Fish Brothers re-release, which I mentioned in last week's video as well. But it's got an Obi strip on it in English, not Japanese, so I haven't got to translate it, unless you want me to translate it to Japanese, which, given my mastering of the language, will of course be of no problem whatsoever. Right. Next up is a Japanese or a Japanese linked artist. Now, I don't have any Japanese music in my collection, sadly, but I do have an album by an album called... I do have an album by a band called Japan, and it's a double album called Exorcising Ghosts. So that is my entry for that. Next up, it's Japan, obviously, as you know, is known as the land of the rising sun. And Brian asked us to name some sunrise music. Well, I've gone for Sunrise by Uriah Heep from the Magician's Birthday album. There we go. Right, next up is an album that screams, city. Japan, I think, is a country of contrast with massive urban conurbations, and then you've got the beautiful countryside. But some of those cities are huge. I could have gone with any punk album really, because like punk to me screams like London 1977 and the city. And I've gone for, well, not a punk album per se, but London Calling by The Clash. Next up is a Zen album. I've quite simply gone with Phaedra by Tangerine Dream, a real sonic voyage, if you will, into Zendom. Right, an album that exceeded expectations next, and that is an easy one for me to pick. It's The River by Bruce Springsteen. Now, this was bought for me in Christmas 1980 by my screensavers, come on, by my parents. I'd never really heard of Bruce Springsteen much. I don't know why they bought me that album, but they did. It was a double album, The River, and I remember by the end of Boxing Day being completely smitten and thinking, I now have to get all this man's music. So from an artist I'd never heard of to being my favourite within 24 hours, that surely matches the definition of exceeding inspiration. Right, next up is an album ahead of its time. Now, I could have picked anything really by Black Sabbath, their first album, the Beatles, obviously Sgt. Pepper, you've got Roxy Music's first album, and you've got Nevermind Bollocks by the Sex Pistols, but I've gone for this one, The Mothers of Invention and Freak Out. I think it still is ahead of its time, that album. Next up is an album you would play on a Walkman cassette player. And now I've chosen an album I did play on a Walkman cassette player, and that is Dire Straits and Making Movies. Now, I remember when I went to university back in 1982, I didn't take my record player and records with me, but instead I used part of my very first grant check to buy myself a stereo tape player, and I taped all my records, and one of the ones I took with me was Dire Straits and Making Movies. And I also had a Walkman cassette player at that time, and I used to play that during like practical on the computer session, as you know. So an album I did actually play on a Walkman. Next up is an album inspired by the Japanese Bullet Train. Now, I think Bullet Train, think speed, like driving, rhythm, that sort of thing. And I've gone with, of course, It's Alive by the Ramones. That's as fast an album as you're going to get. I don't know, it's like 30 songs in 50 minutes, I don't know, something like that. Next up, an album, Lost in Translation. That's actually one of my favourite films, Lost in Translation. But I'm going to pick an album called War of the Worlds by Jeff Wayne. Now, the reason I picked this as Lost in Translation is not the album as such, but the concept behind it. And if you remember, when War of the Worlds was first aired in as a radio show in the US, people thought it was real, and people started running to the hills and running for their lives because they thought Mars had attacked. So I think that that matches the criteria, Lost in Translation. Next up is a live album inspired by the famous Budokan hall or arena in Tokyo. Now, I've not gone for a live album as such, but in his video, Peter spoke of the riots caused when Deep Purple played there and didn't perform an encore for one reason or another. Anyway, a riot ensued. So I've picked a live music experience where a riot ensued, and that was Black Sabbath at the Sophia Gardens in Cardiff in January of 1981 on their Heaven and Hell tour. Now, somehow the promoter double sold tickets for the show. He sold enough tickets for 2 nights, but there was only one night. That was the problem. Anyway, my girlfriend and I were in watching for the start of the show, and the support band, a band called A to Z, were due on. Anyway, the hall was getting fuller and fuller, and there was like a real crush on and whatnot. And the next thing we heard was the sound of like breaking glass, and somebody I knew actually had climbed up outside the hall, broken a window, and then was like abseiling down some curtains to get in. I know, the friends I kept, Anyway, A to Z came on, and halfway through their first song, they were like hooked off almost, like a guy tapped the drummer on the shoulder and went like that, get off. To avoid a full-scale riot, Black Sabbath had agreed to play two shows in the same night. So we saw the first show, tried to hide then in the toilets to see the second one, but were quickly found and ushered out of the building. Spoke to some police outside who said there was nearly like a full scale riot because people didn't think they were going to get in, and they'd paid for their tickets. So thankfully, Sabbath agreed to play twice. Can you imagine that happening in today's risk assessed, safety obsessed world? No way. Right, next up, an album to listen to intently. I've picked The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. Now, I've been trying to get into early Genesis over the last few months, and I bought The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with great expectations of listening to this sonic masterpiece. But every time I've sat down and tried to listen to it, I've been interrupted in one way or the other. So I need to set aside an hour and a half when there's nobody here, and just like turn phones off, everything, and listen to that album intently, and sort of read the liner notes and everything that goes with it, to get the full experience. Right, next, an album with an island theme. I'm rabbit on about this. I've gone for Yes's double album, Tales from Topographic Oceans. Ocean, island, whatever. There we are. Rainy day music. Like Japan, Wales, where I live, is an incredibly wet and rainy country. So we quite often have to pick rainy day music to listen to. And I've gone for one of my favourite albums by one of my favourite artists, and it's Out of the Blue by ELO. Right, Imperfect Perfection next. Now, I could have chosen anything by Jimi Hendrix, where the sort of radio interference in the background through his amp. I could have gone for Led Zeppelin and John Bonham's squeaky bass drum pedal. But I've gone for another radio interfered song, and that is Home Thoughts from Abroad by Clifford T. Ward. A lovely, lovely song from the album Home Thoughts. Right, next up is Origami, an album with interesting packaging. And I got a couple of these. I've got Ashra Tempel's album, which has got layers upon layers of doors that open, and then you take the record out and whatever. I've got an album by an artist called Dr. Z, which is kind of double doors on the front. But the album I've chosen is Space Hymns by Ramesses. The album cover folds out into a double-sided, it must be like an A1 or A0 sized poster. It's 8 times the size of a record. It's 48 inches by 24, I think, something like that. And unravels into that. So that's my pick for Origami, is Space Hymns by Ramesses. Fusion Frenzy next. I've gone for a frenzied album, shall we say. One that I don't fully understand. I don't think I ever will fully understand. And that is Miles Davis and Bitches Brew. It's like a fusion between free jazz and whatever. I have no idea. Can't understand it. Next up, an album that says Nightlife. I could have gone for, some sort of disco album, Saturday Night Fever, something like that, but I haven't got that, so I couldn't have gone for that. The album I have chosen is Thin Lizzy and Jailbreak. And there's a couple of songs there that sort of scream out nightlife, but in particular, the boys are back in town, of course. An album to listen to and unwind at the end of the day. I've picked Dave Brubeck and Time Out. Now, I'm not a massive jazz fan. So I've got Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. I got a couple of Buddy Rich albums, a couple of Frank Sinatra albums, a couple of more modern jazz offerings. I'm not a massive jazz head, but Time Out by Dave Brubeck, I really enjoy listening to that album, and it really does help you unwind. It's very calming and relaxing and very nice. Next up is a song you would play at your funeral. Well, not you would play, but obviously you can't, but a song to be played at your funeral. I thought about this years ago because I very nearly had my own funeral at one stage. I suffer with a blood cancer called myeloma, and it nearly, well, not it, but the side effects of it and my treatment very nearly claimed my life back in 2014 and 2015. I had a few times where I was teetering on the very ragged edge of existence, but pulled through. Anyway, I spent 8 years in remission then after a stem cell transplant, but I relapsed 18 months ago. I'm fine at the moment, but I know I'm only like one phone call away from or one blood test away from being told, bad things, I suppose. Anyway, I tried to think about it, but the song that sprung to mind immediately as one that I would have played at my funeral is from my favourite band, and my favourite band is Queen, and the song I've chosen is Spread Your Wings, a John Deacon composition from the News of the World album. There we go, and on that rather bleak note, that is it. Those are my 20 choices for Brian and his Tokyo record style Japan vinyl tag. There we are. Right then, if you're going to have a go, I'd love to see your choices too. But there we are, Brian. That is it. Tag done, and that's my video. There we are then. Until next time, let's be nice to each other, okay? Take care now. Ta-ra.